I'm Eleanor. For 38 years, I was the mother who always said yes. So when my eldest son walked into my home with a cold ultimatum, he was entirely convinced he held all the cards. He mistook my silence for weakness, believing I would sacrifice anything just to keep my family together. What he didn't realize was that every favor I had ever done for him over the years had left a silent trail, or that the quietest person in the room often holds the sharpest edge. When he finally realized what he had actually walked into, the damage was already done, and there was no turning back. If you believe that a mother's dignity should never be tested, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And before we begin the story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from right now? And what time is it over there? Let me know in the comments below. At 65, I finally have the one thing money cannot easily buy: peace of mind. I live alone in a 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs of Chicago, a home I fully paid off 2 years ago after working 35 years as a middle management accountant. My husband passed away a decade back, leaving me with a modest pension, a clear title to my property, and complete financial independence. I do not ask anyone for help, and I do not owe a single dime to any bank. That independence is my pride, but to my eldest son, it looks like an untapped bank account waiting to be claimed. I have 2 adult children who could not be more different if they tried. My eldest, Brandon, is 38 and has spent his entire adult life acting like success is something he inherits rather than earns. From high school to his late 30s, Brandon was the child everyone excused. He always wore the right brands, talked a big game about high-stakes investments, and expected me to pick up the tab whenever his big plans collapsed. Then there is my youngest daughter, Hannah, who is 30. Hannah worked her way through state college, paid off her own student loans, and now works as a dedicated nurse. She visits me every weekend, cleans the gutters without being asked, and has never once requested a single dollar from me. Last Sunday, I hosted our usual monthly family dinner. Hannah arrived early, helping me chop vegetables in the kitchen and setting the dining room table. Around 6 o'clock, a loud engine roared into my driveway. Brandon had arrived, driving a brand new Mercedes that I knew for a fact he could not afford on his shaky real estate consultant income. He stepped out, dressed in a designer suit, alongside his new girlfriend, Vanessa, a woman who wore oversized sunglasses indoors and checked her phone before even greeting me. "Mom, you really need to upgrade this driveway," Brandon said as he walked through the front door, barely giving me a quick side hug. "The gravel is going to scratch the rims on the lease." He immediately walked into the dining room, pulled out a chair for Vanessa, and gestured at the spread on the table. "Pot roast again? I told you, Vanessa only eats organic pasture-raised beef now. We should have just taken you out to that steakhouse downtown, but I figured you'd prefer staying in your comfort zone." Hannah came out of the kitchen with a pitcher of iced tea and smiled politely. "It's good to see you, Brandon. Hi, Vanessa." Vanessa offered a faint nod, barely looking up from her screen. "Nice place," Vanessa commented, glancing around my living room with a patronizing smirk. "It's so cozy, very 90s. Brandon laughed, pouring himself a glass of wine without asking. "Yeah, my mom likes to keep things simple. She's sitting on a gold mine with this lot, but she insists on living like time stopped 20 years ago." I sat down at the head of the table and took a slow sip of my water. I could feel the tension rising in the room, but I kept my composure. Hannah caught my eye, giving me a subtle, sympathetic look, knowing exactly how arrogant Brandon was being. Brandon cut into his meat, looked at me across the table with a calculated grin, and said, "Anyway, Mom, I didn't just come over for dinner tonight. We need to talk about some serious financial moves. Opportunities like the one I have right now don't wait around forever." I leaned back in my chair, looking directly into his eyes, already knowing that whatever he was about to say would change everything between us. I set my fork down, kept my eyes fixed on Brandon, and asked, What kind of financial moves are you talking about? Brandon wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned forward, adopting his best corporate pitch voice. I'm securing a partnership in a high-end commercial property flip downtown. It's a guaranteed 20% return within 18 months, but I need $300,000 liquid capital by the end of this month to secure my equity stake. Plus, Vanessa and I are putting an offer on a place in the gated community near the golf course. I looked at him quietly. And where do you expect to get $300,000, Brandon? From you, Mom, he said without a hint of hesitation. You're sitting on a paid-off house worth at least $600,000, plus Dad's life insurance payout and your retirement accounts. You can easily take out a home equity loan or liquidate part of my portfolio. It's practically my inheritance anyway. Taking a portion of it now just makes smart financial sense for all of us. Hannah stopped eating and stared at her brother in disbelief. Brandon, are you out of your mind? That's Mom's lifetime savings. That money is her security if she needs long-term care or health care down the road. Stay out of this, Hannah, Brandon snapped, shutting her down immediately. You don't understand how high-level finance works. Mom doesn't need to hoard all that cash while I'm building a real legacy. Vanessa nodded in agreement, casually checking her fingernails. It's really an investment in the family's future, Mrs. Vance. I took a deep breath, maintaining total composure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show anger. I simply looked Brandon straight in the eye and spoke with unwavering clarity. No, Brandon. The answer is no. This house is fully paid off, and my savings will remain untouched. I worked 35 years to secure my independence, and I am not taking out a mortgage on my home or draining my accounts to fund your speculative business deals. Brandon's polished facade shattered instantly. His face flushed red, and he slammed his hands on the dining table, rattling the glassware. Are you serious right now? He roared, standing up from his chair. You're 65 years old, Mom. You're going to die in a few years anyway. What good is all that damn money doing sitting in a bank account while you sit here doing nothing? It's completely selfish. Hannah jumped up. Brandon, apologize to Mom right now. You don't speak to her like that. Shut up, Hannah. Brandon shoved his chair back into the floor. He turned his rage back toward me, pointing his finger directly at my face. Listen to me very carefully, Mom. If you don't give me my rightful share of the inheritance right now when I actually need it, you are dead to me. When Vanessa and I have children, don't you ever expect to see your future grandkids. You will never hold them, you will never visit, and you will die in this house completely alone. The room went dead silent. The toxicity of his words hung in the air like poison. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry, scream, or argue. I just sat there, looking at the man I had raised, seeing him clearly for the first time in his life. My silence was absolute, but inside my mind, a cold, calculated switch flipped. We're leaving, Brandon spat at Vanessa. She grabbed her designer purse, and without another word, they walked out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. Hannah rushed to my side, her voice trembling. Mom, I am so sorry. He's out of line. Are you okay? I looked up at my daughter, my expression completely serene, but my resolve hardened like steel. I'm perfectly fine, Hannah, I said softly. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly. After Hannah helped me clean up the dining room, she urged me to get some rest. I hugged her goodbye, assured her I was fine, and locked the front door behind her. The house was quiet, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I walked into my home office, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. There lay 3 decades of financial records, folders containing bank statements, wire transfer receipts, canceled checks, and legal documentation. For years, I had kept these records out of habit, as an accountant. Tonight, I saw them for what they truly were, evidence of a massive financial drain that I had foolishly labeled as parental love. I pulled out Brandon's thick file and began turning the pages. At 19, Brandon got arrested for reckless driving and crashed a new sedan I had bought for his college commute. I hired a private criminal lawyer, paid $5,000 in legal fees, settled the damages out of court, and bought him another car. That single incident cost me $30,000. At 22, he dropped out of university after 4 semesters of failing grades, forfeiting $40,000 in prepaid tuition I had worked overtime to secure. When he turned 28, he convinced me to back his failed online apparel business. To protect his credit score after it went under, I quietly paid off $35,000 of his business debt. I sat back in my chair, staring at the figures. Over 20 years, I had stepped in to shield Brandon from every consequence of his bad choices. Every time he stumbled, I threw money at the problem. I had believed I was being a loving mother, but in reality, I had enabled an entitled predator. I had created the man who stood in my dining room tonight, telling me I was useless simply because I was still breathing. Then I opened Hannah's thin folder. There were no bailout receipts or wire transfers. They were only college transcripts from the state university where she worked 2 jobs to pay her own way, alongside heartfelt birthday cards. When I had knee surgery 4 years ago, Hannah took 2 weeks off work to stay in my guest room, cooking meals, changing bandages, and helping me walk. She had never asked for a single dollar or a loan. The contrast was stark and eye-opening. Brandon viewed my life savings as his birthright, while Hannah respected the sacrifices I made to earn it. Brandon believed he could threaten to cut off my future grandchildren and leave me to die alone, expecting me to collapse under emotional pressure. But he miscalculated. He forgot that before I was his mother, I was a seasoned corporate accountant. I knew how to balance a ledger. If Brandon wanted to treat our family relationship as a cold financial transaction, I was more than happy to play by his rules. He wanted his share of the inheritance now? I would show him that he had already spent every single penny of it years ago. I closed the filing cabinet drawer, locked it, and picked up my phone. I composed a concise email to my longtime estate attorney, Arthur Vance, requesting an emergency appointment for 9 o'clock the following morning. It was time to pull the plug on Brandon's free ride and build an ironclad strategy that would protect my daughter, my assets, and my dignity once and for all. At 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, I walked into Arthur Vance's office on the 20th floor of downtown Chicago's financial district. Arthur had been my estate attorney for 15 years, handling my late husband's probate and my original will. I set a heavy black binder on his glass desk with a solid thud. He greeted me with a polite smile, which quickly turned into a look of curiosity as he saw the stack of bank statements, receipts, and wire transfer confirmations neatly organized inside. "Eleanor, your email sounded urgent," Arthur said, taking his seat behind his desk. "What are we looking at here?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I need to restructure my entire estate plan immediately, Arthur," I replied, sitting down across from him. "I want to ensure my assets are completely protected from any future litigation or claims by my eldest son, Brandon." Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened the binder. "Tell me what happened." I gave him a concise summary of Brandon's demands from the night before, including his ultimatum and his threat to cut off contact if I refused to hand over $300,000 immediately. Arthur shook his head slowly. "Entitlement is a difficult thing to deal with, Eleanor, but legally, he has no right to your money while you are alive." "I know," I nodded firmly, "but I want to go a step further. Over the last 20 years, I have paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars to bail Brandon out of financial and legal messes. I've itemized every transaction in that binder, complete with dates, bank account statements, and wire transfer numbers." Arthur flipped through the pages, his eyebrow rising as he read the totals. $40,000 in wasted college tuition, $30,000 for a reckless driving crash and legal fees, $35,000 in credit card and business debt liquidations. The numbers are substantial, Eleanor. "Under Illinois law, I want every single dollar I gave Brandon treated as an itemized advance on his inheritance," I instructed calmly. "I want a formal legal ledger drawn up showing that his share of my estate has already been distributed to him in full during my lifetime. His current remaining balance is 0. Arthur smiled, appreciating the cold precision of my plan. "That is entirely valid. However, if you leave this in a standard revocable trust or a traditional will, He could still attempt to contest it in probate court after you pass, claiming undue influence. Then we aren't using a standard trust, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I want to move my home, my investment accounts, and all my liquid savings into an irrevocable living trust today. Arthur tapped his pen on the paper. An irrevocable trust means you transfer ownership to the trust entity itself. Once it's locked, you cannot alter it, and Brandon cannot touch it. It bypasses probate entirely, making it virtually indestructible. That is exactly what I want, I replied. Name my daughter Hannah as the primary beneficiary and sole successor trustee. Furthermore, I want an aggressive no contest clause inserted, an in terrorem clause. With a no contest clause, Arthur explained, if Brandon attempts to challenge the trust in court, he automatically forfeits any theoretical right to any bequest and will be held personally liable for all legal costs incurred by the trust. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the legal documentation. When I finally put my signature on the final page, a quiet sense of triumph washed over me. The trap was set, sealed, and completely airtight. Now all that remained was delivering the news to Brandon on my own terms. 2 days after leaving Arthur Vance's law office, I sent a concise text message to Brandon and Hannah, inviting them both over for dinner on Sunday evening. I wrote that I had made my decision regarding the estate and wanted to finalize all financial arrangements in person. Brandon replied within 2 minutes, sending a smug emoji, followed by a text stating he would be there to wrap things up. Throughout the weekend, he sent follow-up messages reminding me to have all banking details ready. He truly believed that his crude ultimatum had worked. He thought I was terrified of dying alone and that I was about to hand over a cashier's check for $300,000 to secure his favor. Sunday arrived, and Hannah was the first to show up. She looked anxious, pulling me aside in the hallway before Brandon arrived. "Mom, if you're giving in to him just to keep the peace, please don't," she urged, her voice laced with deep concern. "You don't owe Brandon anything, and you shouldn't drain your life savings for him." I reached out, touched her hand gently, and gave her a reassuring smile. "Trust me, Hannah, everything is completely under control. Just sit down and let the evening play out." At 6 o'clock sharp, Brandon pulled into the driveway in his leased Mercedes, accompanied once again by Vanessa. He walked through the front door with an air of absolute victory, strutting into the dining room like he already owned the title to the house. He didn't bother taking off his designer coat before pulling out his chair at the head of the table. "I'm glad you came to your senses, Mom," Brandon declared, pouring himself a glass of water with a satisfied smirk. "Vanessa and I actually spoke to the listing agent for that golf course property this morning. We told them we'd have the earnest money deposit wired over by tomorrow afternoon. It's honestly the smartest choice you could have made for the family." Vanessa offered a patronizing smile, adjusting her expensive sunglasses on her head. "Honestly, Mrs. Vance, it's for the best. A woman your age shouldn't be stressing over managing complex financial portfolios anyway." I sat at the opposite end of the table, looking at both of them while maintaining total composure. My hands rested quietly on the table. "I have made my decision," I said steadily, "and all the necessary legal paperwork has been finalized." I reached down into my leather handbag beside my chair and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, stamped with the official seal of Vance & Associates Estate Law. I placed it in the center of the table and slid it slowly across the polished wood until it rested right in front of Brandon. He stared down at it for a moment, his smug grin faltering slightly, when he realized it was a bound set of legal documents rather than a cashier's check. "What's this?" Brandon asked, his brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the bold header printed across the front cover. "Itemized advance on inheritance and final asset distribution statement." "Open it," I said calmly. "It contains the full, certified financial accounting of your share of my estate." Brandon tore open the seal and pulled out a 20-page legal document bound in blue attorney backing paper. Hannah watched silently, her eyes wide with curiosity, while Vanessa leaned over his shoulder to look. As Brandon flipped to the first page, his confident posture completely froze. The smug arrogance drained from his face instantly, replaced by a sudden, sharp look of bewilderment as his eyes locked onto the top header and the long column of numbers listed below.
"What is this nonsense, Mom?" Brandon demanded, his voice cracking as he flicked furiously through the ledger pages. "This looks like a bill." "That is exactly what it is," I answered with absolute composure. Page 3 itemizes the $40,000 in tuition I paid for the private university you dropped out of after failing 2 semesters. Page 6 details the $30,000 for your reckless driving crash, criminal legal representation, and vehicle replacement. Page 10 lists $35,000 in unpaid business credit cards I settled on your behalf when your apparel venture folded.
Add in your personal bailouts over the last 20 years, and the total cash outlay stands at $355,000. Brandon slammed the heavy document down on the wooden dining table, rattling the silverware. "That was years ago. You were my mother, for God's sake. Parents help their kids. You can't charge me for my past mistakes." "I am not charging you for your past mistakes," I corrected him firmly, leaning forward slightly. "I am treating those expenditures as an itemized advance on your inheritance. Under the guidance of my estate attorney, Arthur Vance, those payments have been legally categorized as lifetime cash distributions. Given that my total estate is valued at roughly $600,000, your equal 50% share would have been $300,000. Since you have already withdrawn $355,000 during my lifetime, your remaining balance is $0. Vanessa's jaw dropped in complete shock. "Are you out of your mind? You're cutting him off completely?" "He isn't cut off," I replied, looking directly at Vanessa before turning my eyes back to my son. "He simply received his inheritance early and spent every single dime of it on failed business deals, legal bailouts, and personal luxuries. His share is fully paid." Brandon's face turned an ugly shade of crimson. He stood up, knocking his chair backward onto the hardwood floor. "You senile old fool. I'll contest this in court. I'll hire the best probate lawyer in Chicago and drag you through litigation until you don't have a penny left." I pulled a single certified document from my leather portfolio and pushed it toward him. "Feel free to try, Brandon. But before you spend thousands on retainer fees, read Section 2. Last Friday, I transferred my home, my liquid bank accounts, and my investment portfolio into an irrevocable living trust. I no longer personally own those assets. The trust does. My daughter, Hannah, is named as the sole successor trustee and primary beneficiary." Hannah gasped softly, her eyes wide as she looked from the papers to me. "Mom, furthermore," I continued smoothly, "the trust agreement contains an enforceable no-contest clause, an in terrorem clause. If you file any legal challenge against the trust or attempt to contest my estate, you automatically forfeit any theoretical right to claim a dime, and you will be legally obligated to reimburse the trust for every single dollar of legal fees incurred defending itself. If you sue, you will bankrupt yourself." Brandon stared at the page, reading the bold legal terms stamped by the court. The color drained completely from his face as the cold reality set in. He realized there was no loophole, no weakness, and no emotional leverage left to exploit. Arthur Vance had locked every single door. "You planned this," Brandon whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer rage. "You set me up." "You made a business proposition on Thursday night, Brandon," I said, standing up with total dignity. "You told me to look at our family dynamic through cold financial logic. I simply balanced the ledger. You spent your inheritance years ago. Now please get out of my house." Vanessa grabbed her designer bag, looking utterly terrified of the legal trap Brandon had walked into. Brandon stared at my calm face, his mouth opening and closing, before grabbing his coat and storming out the door, with Vanessa scrambling right behind him. The heavy oak door slammed shut, echoing through the quiet house. The sound of Brandon's tires screeching down the driveway faded into the night, leaving the dining room completely still. I stood by the head of the table, letting out a long, quiet breath that felt like releasing 20 years of heavy, unspoken burden. For the first time in decades, my chest felt light. The toxic cloud of guilt and manipulation that Brandon had held over my head for so long had finally dissipated into thin air. Hannah remained seated, staring blankly at the thick legal portfolio resting on the table in front of her. Her hands were slightly shaking as she gently traced her fingers over her name printed on the Irrevocable Trust documents. "Mom," Hannah whispered, looking up at me with eyes glistening with tears. "I don't even know what to say. I didn't want any of this. I never stayed by your side or helped you out because I wanted your money." I walked around the table, pulled out the chair next to her, and took her hands in mine. "I know that, sweetie. That is precisely why you are receiving it. You never viewed my life as a stepping stone or my aging as an opportunity to plunder my bank account. You treated me with respect, love, and dignity. You earned every bit of this protection, not because you asked for it, but because you lived your life with integrity." Hannah wiped a stray tear from her cheek and pulled me into a tight embrace. "I just wanted him to treat you right, Mom. It broke my heart hearing how he spoke to you."
He spoke to me that way because I allowed him to believe he held all the power, I said softly, holding her close. Tonight, he learned that actions have consequences. He wanted a financial transaction, and I simply balanced his account. Over the next few months, the inevitable fallout unfolded just as I knew it would. Without my bank account to cushion his reckless spending, Brandon's lavish lifestyle crumbled like a house of cards. The commercial property flip he bragged about collapsed when he couldn't raise the required capital, leaving him severely in debt to his business partners. Within 3 months, his leased Mercedes was repossessed from his apartment complex. Shortly after the car disappeared, Vanessa packed her bags and left him, realizing that his illusion of wealth was nothing more than an empty shell built on borrowed time and prospective inheritance. Brandon tried calling me twice from different phone numbers over those months, attempting to apologize and crying about his impending bankruptcy. But I did not answer his calls or fall for his performative regret. I had spent 38 years shielding him from reality, and continuing to do so would only rob him of the one thing he desperately needed: accountability. He was finally learning to survive in the real world as an adult, completely on his own dime. As for me, my life returned to a serene, unbroken rhythm.
Hannah visited every weekend, not out of obligation or financial greed, but out of genuine warmth. Together, we planted a vibrant rose garden in the backyard and hosted relaxed Sunday dinners with real laughter and mutual respect. It was a crisp Tuesday evening in late September when I made myself a fresh cup of chamomile tea and walked out onto my back porch. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and violet. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the gentle rustle of autumn leaves in the breeze. I took a slow sip of the warm tea, leaning back into my wooden rocking chair with a calm, contented smile. I hadn't destroyed my family, nor had I acted out of petty malice or blind rage. I had simply closed an open account, drawn a firm boundary, and protected my own legacy. My paid-off house was safe, my daughter's future was secured, and my dignity was restored completely intact. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the cool evening air, and finally enjoyed the pure, unshakable peace I had earned.